Detroit is our second stop on our geographic journey of case studies. And as I mentioned earlier, I have the pleasure of playing a leadership role in an initiative called Reimagining the Civic Commons. So Reimagining, again, is a national demonstration that seeks to revitalize and reconnect public spaces. And for us, we define public spaces quite broadly. So this is certainly parks and open spaces, but also sidewalks and streets and libraries, all of those special third places. The initiative launched in 2016. It works in 5 cities. You're going to hear from one of them, Detroit, but we're also in Akron, Memphis, Philadelphia, and who am I forgetting? Chicago, of course, my hometown. That's what I forgot. Sorry, Chicago. Don't hate me. So the work that's underway in each of these cities is quite different, right? It is deeply partnered with residents, resident-led, truly, and very authentic to place. But what the common thread of all of this work is that Civic Commons has 4 really essential outcome areas, and I really think of them as sort of the secret sauce of Civic Commons, and they are civic engagement, socioeconomic mixing, value creation, and environmental sustainability. So all of the teams on the ground are driving towards these outcomes, and I know there's a long resource list that's either on the website right now or will soon be available for this event, so you can learn a lot more about that. But right now, you're going to hear about it from 2 women that I'm delighted to not only call colleagues, but friends, as well as we've been on this journey together for several years. So sitting here is Alexa Bush, who is the Urban Design Director for the East Region for the City of Detroit's Planning Department. Welcome, Alexa. And Sierra O'Leary, who is the co-executive director for the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, or DCDC as we like to call it, where she leads collaborative planning and design citywide. And she's also a professor of practice at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Architecture. So, Alexa, when people hear Detroit, they are often thinking about the transformation that's happening downtown and in Midtown, whatever they see on 60 Minutes, but they are usually not thinking about some great work that's happening in Detroit's neighborhoods. And that's actually where the Civic Commons work in Detroit is based, in the Fitzgerald community. So I wonder if you might start us off by helping people understand where Fitzgerald is, because Detroit is also 139 square miles. It's huge. So where is it, and what is the work that's been underway the last 2 years with Civic Commons?
Thanks, Lynn. On yet? There we go. Thanks, Lynn, for the introduction. Thanks to everyone for inviting us. I think we're really excited to tell our story, and I think based on the conversation so far, I'm like, yes, everyone speaks our language around these issues, especially of how the built environment really intersects with health, maybe more from a wellness way of thinking about things rather than an illness or a sickness model. So yes, we are working in a neighborhood in Northwest Detroit. It is on our northern border. 8 Mile is its northern boundary. It's about, the entire district is about 6 square miles. So it's kind of, for us, a city within the city is how we're thinking about it. These are sort of the outcomes that we're driving at from the Civic Commons that Lynn mentioned. There's been some talk about working across silos this morning. I think for us, having a really outcome-driven framework has enabled us to work much more effectively. Not only I work for city government across different departments, but really across sectors to say there's something bigger than all of us that we're really driving toward. So in Detroit, we're working in a neighborhood. It is in an area that is predominantly African American. And there's really 3 pieces that I'd love to point at for you guys to take away from today. The first is sort of how we're trying to use public space at the heart of neighborhood reinvestment. The second is really thinking about the role of having a really robust, engaged infrastructure of meeting with the community to make that development more inclusive. And thirdly, to really think about in Motor City, in a very auto-oriented environment, how do we start to graft much better dignified ways of moving around the city, be that on foot or on bike. So that's really undergirding a lot of what we're trying to do. This is that neighborhood I mentioned. We're working in the Fitzgerald community, where over 40% of the properties, what you see in blue, are currently publicly owned by our land bank. It's adjacent. let's take a pause. Sorry. We get used to dealing in really big numbers, but just in the project area of Civic Commons, there were over 400 of those properties, but it is adjacent to some incredibly stable neighborhoods. The income difference, the darkest is the highest income. So within a mile, you really have the cross section of the entire city of Detroit. Again, all African-American majority neighborhoods, but really from making over $100,000 per year in household income down to about $13,000 per year in the Fitzgerald neighborhood. So we have a really strong backbone of trying to not only meet with community, work with existing leaders. Sometimes it feels like do a bit of community organizing, but we've had a lot of engagement that Sierra will talk a little bit more in depth about, where together we needed to create a plan for what do we do with all this vacant land. We are not going to be able to do 400 single-family infill homes in this neighborhood. How do we use public space to actually create an intentional, cared-for neighborhood? How do we actually use that vacancy to create public spaces where there weren't prior? This was 100% single-family subdivision with a commercial corridor. We're actually trying to graft public spaces back into the future, even should there be infill development. But the vision is really to have a community that, looks cared for, feels intentional, is grounded in public space, involves rehabbing vacant structures and reactivating vacant lots. We do have a really big team. My role in the planning department is often to be the wrangler of a lot of our city agencies that touch neighborhoods. We have nonprofit partners. Sarah will talk about the work of the Collaborative Design Center at one of our university partners, nonprofits, foundations, really a cross-sector collaboration. From the get-go, working in this neighborhood, we've thought about things like workforce. How do we use that to engage people who maybe don't have the ability to come to a meeting because they're trying to figure out how to get dinner on the table that night? What's another way to bring people into the work? How might we actually use the opportunity of development in the neighborhood to provide a real economic footing for people to get jobs in the place where they live? We've created together opportunities for new public spaces like parks. Here we took a collection of about 26 vacant lots and stitched them together to create a new park in the heart of this neighborhood. It opened in July of 2018. We probably started this work February of 2016. So for us, super fast. For the community, not fast enough in terms of a place that hadn't seen real investment in quite some time. Someone brought up the role of arts. That's been something really important to us as a platform. We engaged an artist to help the community tell the story of the neighborhood through the park. There's about 140 feet of ceramic tile murals in the park that we built together with residents in the neighborhood. This is an image from an event that we had. You can see the mural in the background, but really unique opportunities for engagement. We've done a lot of resident-led programming that I think Sierra will touch some on. I talked a little bit about the built environment. In this neighborhood, the way it was subdivided, we had blocks that were about half a mile long. Really inhibitor to kids getting around. We talked a lot about senior isolation, huge barrier to getting around. We've been looking at how do we use that vacant land to create walking and biking paths to actually change the grid to be more walkable and promote health. We also think beyond those open spaces, though, even to our streets. So how can this street actually perform as a public space for people, for businesses? How do we, again, create more dignified ways of moving people through that space? This is about a now $5 or $6 million investment that the city will be putting into the street. It is from a gas tax bond that we have. And again, I think to that point of how do you use public dollars differently in a really intentional way? This is something that we're trying to do in conjunction with this work. I'm going to hand it off to Sierra to talk a little bit about some of the corridor activation and engagement we're doing.